Township and New Freedom Borough. We offer all sorts of programs for adults, for kids, for families. This speaker series, we have preschool programs and summer camps and parades and special events. We have concerts in the park down in New Freedom coming up this summer. All kinds of really great things. And of course, a speaker series here every month. Tonight, I'm very happy to present our very own Chuck Cusimano. He has a fascinating story. I asked him if he would please put together this presentation for us because his story is just so inspirational, and I know there's so many people in the community that would love to and would benefit from hearing it. So he was kind enough to do that for us, and it's going to be a great presentation. Before we turn it over to Chuck, I just want to say that we are being live streamed on the internet tonight, so you are all officially movie stars. So Chuck has the mic so they can hear him. But if you have anything to say, if you speak into this mic, they can hear you at home. If you don't, they can't hear you. So if you want to talk, you can just raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic and you can be heard at home. So that's it.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Gina for inviting me to participate in this tonight. We got a whole lot of time to cover in a short period of time. So we're just going to gloss over my first 39 years, and the bulk of this is going to be on the last 29. Okay. I was born in Baltimore City. When we were 5 years old, we moved to Baltimore County, which is just over the city-county line. Went to Catholic school for 8 years. And when I was 14, I started helping one of my neighbors who had his own contracting business. My senior year of high school, I only needed 1 credit to graduate. I went to school for that 1 credit and then went to work. I had various jobs in construction. Then in 1979, the beginning of 1979, I had ruptured my spleen in an accident. And they had removed that, and they told me at the time that that's part of your immune system. And I needed to be a little bit more cautious about catching colds or whatever. I was more susceptible to catching whatever. I never really got sick for years. Then in the end of '79, I went to work for Johns Hopkins Hospital. Now they had the same trades on the outside, they had small groups within the inside. And I was hired in the carpentry section on the new construction end. I was there for 2 or 3 months. My supervisor, Bob, stopped to come in one day in the lunchroom and said, we need somebody to help the locksmith. Any volunteers? I didn't know any better. I raised my hand. So at that point, the reason he needed help was he worked harder at not working than he did at working. You know, I mean, there were tens of thousands of doors in the hospital. Each one had its own file cabinet, its own filing system. And this procedure was, if you got a work order, you went to that book for that cabinet, you pulled out the key, you cut the key, you stamped the identification code, you put the key back in the cabinet. Well, for years, all he did was throw the keys in various waste cans. So you had 10,000 or more so keys. My job was to put all them back. So that lasted for about another 3 months. And this guy decided he's going to retire. So the supervisor came to me and said, congratulations, you're the new locksmith. I said, well, wait a minute. Right? Well, you know, at that point there, not only did they give me the keys to the hospital, I got to control the keys to the hospital. So I did that up until 1991. At that point, beginning of '91, because of the Joint Commission on Hospital Accreditations, the hospital wasn't really up to code for fire compartmentation. So a lot of things came out of that. So it was a new division called Life Safety, and I became supervisor of that. And what we had to do, I had 12 men that went around the hospital. We had to catalog every single door. There was a spec sheet that had to be kept on every door. We had to make repairs, and every quarter, those doors had to be re-inspected. Then the second part of the crew was wall compartmentation, where we would start in the corner of a room, measure out 10 feet, put a barcode on the ceiling grid, go another 10 feet. then everything that was above in those areas had to be documented on a blueprint, the penetrations, whatever went through the wall, and that had to be sealed. That was a time-consuming job. It was more than we could do to do with repairs. So there were two outside contractors that I worked with and got to supervise them. And that kind of brings us up until Friday, January 29th, 1995. Typical day started out middle of the holiday season, colds and flu season. That Friday afternoon, I started feeling a little ill. Didn't really think anything of it. I got progressively worse Friday, Saturday. I couldn't get warm. I had the thermostat turned all the way up. I've got a mountain of blankets on. And I noticed early Sunday morning that my toenails and fingernails were starting to turn bluish black. So that's when I went to the hospital. And when I went to, it was Franklin Square, it was a local community hospital. When I went in there, my temperature was 106 degrees. I walked into the hospital with that. Now at this point, we're going to start some pictures. Some of these pictures might be a little disturbing, but I was in Franklin Square. I was admitted on January 31st, 1995. Being the New Year's holiday, my immediate supervisor, Bob, was on vacation. So when we called into work, I believe it was that Tuesday morning, the supervisor filling in, his name was Chuck. So Wednesday morning, he came to Franklin Square, talked to the doctors, went back to Johns Hopkins Hospital, and went directly to the Vice President of Facilities and Design, Sally. Said that they don't have the ability to treat me properly, and we need to get him transferred to Hopkins. Well, the Vice President called over to Franklin Square, and they refused to release me. So Sally and Chuck went back to Franklin Square and stayed there until they put me in an ambulance, transferred me to Hopkins. These are the pictures that were taken on January 3rd. That's several days after the onset of this. Things got much worse after that. My skin actually turned black on the top. Click it. Now, I kind of knew going in there things were serious. And when I was transferred to Hopkins, working there for almost 18 years, I had a lot of the department heads as my primary care physicians. And one of them was the chairperson for hematology. You can continue clicking. Now on my nose, as you can see, the end of my nose is black. Well, they didn't amputate my nose, but throughout this, as the tissue died off, they kept removing the dead skin. And eventually, a good bit of my nose was going, and there was just a cavity where it belonged. When things started to heal, my upper lip was then started to be pulled up in there, which kind of now affects the way I speak because all this was rearranged. And what they did, and there'll be some more pictures we'll show you when they started. For my nose, they did what they called a forehead flap, where they took cartilage from my ears to rebuild the septum, and then they cut a triangular patch of my scalp. You can see there's a T-shaped scar there. They left it attached at the bridge of the nose, rolled it around to give me my nose. That was a procedure that I don't know how many hours it took, but that over the next that didn't start until after I was discharged out of the hospital. But surgery didn't start until then, and it was like every 7 weeks I went back in for another surgery. They kept reconstructing it. It was a total of 12 surgeries on my face. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. We'll go back and cover these. This was March 14th of '96. Now, because of all my skin dying off, it was very, very thin and very tender. So this was the first day that they came in with my first set of prosthetics. And I was told several days ahead of time, and it was reinforced, you're going to put them on, you're going to stand up and sit down immediately. They're just see how they're going to be for fitting. Well, when I get something in my mind, I can be a little hard-headed and stubborn at times. So once I put them on and stood up, it's Brian, my prosthetist, he just retired. I was with him the whole time since then. Move out of my way, I'm going to walk. Well, it was a lot of work. I mean, I'd lost a lot of weight, a lot of muscle tone, but I needed to prove to myself that I was going to walk again. And at that point, I knew I was. Didn't know if it's going to be with crutches, with walkers or whatever, but I knew I was going to walk. That's Ellen. She was my primary physical therapist. And my case was so unusual that even the physical therapist didn't really know how to proceed with exercises. So she would come up with all these exercises. I'd do them. She'd challenge me to do them. I'd do them, then I'd challenge her to come up with some harder ones. So we had a lot of fun during my time at Hopkins. That was when I was home. They still hadn't really done much. They were doing a few things with cadaver skin on my nose, but they hadn't done the forehead flap yet. I went from 165 pounds down to 105 at the lowest point. That's what it looked like when they started my forehead flap. And you see there was a lot of scar tissue above my lip, under my nose. And what they would do is, like I said, at every 7 weeks they would go in and they would remove one side, remove some of the tissue underneath, reshape that. 7 weeks later, do the other side. Okay, these are the major symptoms that I was diagnosed with. Now, doctors at Hopkins called it a post-splenectomy fatal pneumococcal sepsis disease illness. If you look it up now, it's called an overwhelming post-splenectomy infection, or OPSI. And it goes through, various things. Basically, what happened in layman's terms was, without having a spleen, a pneumococcal bacteria entered my bloodstream. The antibodies in the body attacked this bacteria, which encapsulated it, which caused my blood to start clotting. So the first thing they had to do was try to thin my blood to restore blood flow, while knowing that I'm going to be facing amputations. Next. Again, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I was 39 years old. This was my 40th birthday party. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail further on in the slideshow. Bear with us. This is new for both of us. So. You can see this is an experiment here. So I want to thank everybody for being my test subjects. I wanted to say guinea pigs, but I was told I might not be politically correct. Okay, now what you're about to see are some of the projects that I have built and some of the things I've accomplished in the last 29 years, just using my little mittens here. Okay. And this should be automatic. Okay, now going back to December 31st, 1995. Can you hear me in the back there? Okay. That was the day that my life ended and my life began. The life I had known for the previous 39 years was ending, the new life was starting. It's a pneumococcal bacteria, blood infection. Now, my sister Barb was my biggest advocate. And I don't think in the first 2 or 3 months that she missed a day coming to the hospital. And she did some research. And back then, a pneumococcal bacteria was something they didn't know a whole lot about. They put the survival rate at about 1%. 29 years later, that survival rate is about 30%. And I just recently heard a story of a friend of mine who had an acquaintance that started feeling sick and had passed away within 2 or 3 days. Okay. As you can imagine, it was a roller coaster ride for a lot of people. It was very, very hard on my family, my friends. And when I was first brought to Hopkins, things didn't look very, very, very good. So they told my family that I needed to say my goodbyes. And I was going through a very bitter custody battle at that time. So when my ex was contacted, she refused to bring the kids in and let me say goodbye until I signed over everything she wanted. Well, that was the spark I needed to fight. I'm not dying without saying goodbye to my kids. So that kind of backfired on them. Okay. The next thing, of course, working for 18 years at Hopkins, a lot of people wanted to know what they could do. And the doctor said, at this point, donate blood. Well, they put on a special blood drive, and usually we'd have like 2 blood drives a year, and Red Cross would come in to take care of that. They weren't equipped for the number of volunteers that showed up that day. They collected 98 pints of blood and turned a lot of people away. Of course, and then there were the visitors. That was one of the initially bad things about being there. Everybody wanted to come in and say hi to me. Well, it got to the point that the nurses had to put a guard at the door to keep people from coming in around the clock. So if you get sick and you work at a hospital, try not to go there if you got a lot of friends. Okay. Now, I had a lot of input in my care. Even with that high fever, I never lost consciousness. And I kind of knew early on that I was facing amputations. We didn't quite know the levels of them. So the game plan that the doctor set out was, with my feet, the infections were in my toes and in my heels. They were going to amputate those first, and if they didn't get the infection, it would be at the ankle, and if they still didn't catch the infection, it was going to be above the knees. Well, at that point, I asked to speak to the physicians or the surgeons, the prosthetist, and the physical therapist, had discussions with them on what is the best level to be amputated at, to be ahead of the infections, and to be fitted for prosthetics. And they said above the knees. That's what we did. On January 18th, they did what they called a guillotine cut, where they just cut straight through, sealed off the arteries and veins, and then packed it. Monitored me for infections. On January 26th of 1996 is when they did the closures on my legs. Now, for my fingers, the only thing that they would say is that we're going to save as much viable tissue as we possibly can. On January 30th, that afternoon, my sister came in as she usually did. And don't take this the wrong way, but you look worse than I felt that day. Right? I mean, she had been crying the night before. And she came in, and like a lot of people, they were searching for the words to say. So it's like, come here, sit on my bed, and tell me what's going on. So she said, Chuck, I can't comprehend what you got to be going through. Now, with the construction background, besides working at Hopkins, that was mainly for the benefits. I had a side business doing home improvements where I made my extra money. So she said she went home the night before, walked in her house, didn't take her coat off, and just kind of collapsed on the sofa and started looking around in her home. And the more she looked around, the more she cried. She thought about everything that I had done for her, for family, and for friends. And without even knowing it, she didn't realize how she got to my house. Now, the house I had was a 1.5-story bungalow at the time. It was built in 1927. Throughout the years, it went through all the current trends of remodeling. I kind of liked the old craftsmanship, so I was in the process of redoing the entire house. So she started in the upstairs, sat in the rooms, looked around, went room by room. Then she found herself in the basement in my workshop. And she's sitting there, and she said, I'm looking around at all the tools on the wall there. And she said, and then she said, she realized that there was a point in my life where I never knew how to use any of those tools, but I taught myself. And she realized that my hands, no matter what's left, was just another one of these tools. Who I was, what I did, and what I would do, and it should be sure that comes from in here and in here. I think about that a lot. Okay. Now, being in construction, one of the things that I always had some concerns about was what would happen if I had an accident and God forbid I lost a finger or two. Well, I'm facing losing all my fingers now. So once we got through that, there was a lot of other things that started going wrong. There was a period of time where the smell of food, when they would bring it in, I'd get nauseous and couldn't eat. And of course, that's hospital food, so I mean, that was kind of expected. But that went on for how many weeks? Over a month, probably. That's when I went down to 105 pounds. Oh, this is my sister, Barb, who's been there all the time for me. Love you, sis. So as bad as everything was, I woke up one morning, elevated my bed, and started looking around. And that's when things really started getting real. I mean, the worst possible thing that could happen was happening. Above everything else, my hair's falling out now. It's like, when does it stop? Well, fortunately, it grew back. Okay. Now, working at Hopkins, said I'd been a locksmith, so there wasn't a place in the hospital that I hadn't had access to, or worked a lot with the department heads. So some of the guys had went to human resources, and they said, look, we've accrued all this sick time, we're losing sick time, it's going to be a long road ahead for Chuck, can we donate our sick time? Human resources said no. But then they came back a couple of days later and said, we won't do that, but we'll allow anybody that wants to donate any vacation time, we'll do that. People donated in excess of 2,000 hours of vacation time, which kept me on the books to be on the insurance, on my insurance policy through Hopkins. So it was the people that worked there and Hopkins management had done that. And of course, there was a lot of things happening during that time there. Guys that I worked with to come up, and a couple of times we all got in trouble because I was waiting to go out to physical therapy or something, and they said, well, let's not wait, let's go. So I kind of got kidnapped, and they're looking around the hospital for me. So, but we had a lot of fun. Other times they'd pick me up and say, well, hey, let's go out visiting people. So everybody went above and beyond at Hopkins. Now, I said I was admitted to Johns Hopkins on December 31st. I was admitted to Franklin Square on December 31st, 1995. Went to Hopkins on January 3rd. I wasn't discharged from Hopkins until April 1st of 96. Now, the insurance companies early on, once the amputations were done, wanted to ship me off to a nursing home. Well, the doctor said, he's staying here. We're his doctors. You're not. He'll leave when we're good and ready to let him leave. So the next plan was to go to Good Samaritan Hospital for rehabilitation. That was on April 1st. I was told I'd be there 6 to 8 weeks through there. On the 12th day, they come and said, we're kicking you out tomorrow. They said, there's nothing else we can teach you. You just have to wait for your skin to heal and get tougher. Now, with that hospital, what they did was, since the rehab unit and the hospital rooms were on the same floor, I was allowed to stay in the gym all day as long as I wasn't in the way. And that's what I did. After 3.5 months in the hospital, I just wanted to get out. Now, going home was another thing. The day before, the physical therapist came, we went to my house to do a walkthrough to make recommendations. And of course, I had to prove something to myself once again. And I had a full-size van at the time. So I talked him into letting me sit in my van. Of course, I had the keys and started it up and took it for a little ride a little bit. I just wanted to make sure I could work the pedals and stuff. So, you know, that was the first day I was home. Now, of course, a lot of things changed in my life, you know, throughout all this. Now, one of the things that really changed for me was I went to Catholic school, and that was a time when the nuns taught. Wasn't a very good student. I thought differently. I learned differently. I was a skinny kid. I was uncoordinated. And because I didn't fit in their little box, I had a target put on my back through the 8 years. So I was always kind of, in a way, bullied by the nuns, made to feel that I was worthless. And it wasn't much better at home sometimes. So even as an adult, that stuck with me, and I didn't want to go out because I went out and did what I had to, but I always felt like everybody was looking at me, pointing, you know, like you're the oddball. There was a negative spotlight. Well, at this point, I didn't care what people thought. I just wanted to go out. So I got a hole where my nose was. I'm 105 pounds. My clothes are draping off of me. It's like, we're going out. And we did. And it didn't matter. So where we're at now. It was a little difficult trying to do this. It started with a ream of paper. I had to keep funneling it down, condensing it down. So like I said, that really didn't matter anymore. Like I said, I was 39 years old when this happened. Now back then, you know, there was a little phrase, life begins at 40. The kids are almost out of the house and so forth. Of course, my kids were still small. They were 1 and 3 when I got sick, and the oldest one was 10. So at 39 years old, I had to learn how to do everything all over again. Walking, bathing, feeding myself, clothing myself. And then when you think about it, we take a lot of things for granted. Right now, you know, we have technology. We look at the internet every day. Pardon me? We look at the internet every day. And we go into box stores. The only thing that you really see that accommodate disabled people are elevators or automatic doors. They don't make things and market them for people without fingers. So I had to adapt to everything that was out there if I wanted to continue to live. Okay. And then, I mean, there are things out there, but most of the time insurances won't pay for them, and they're very cost prohibitive. I mean, insurance companies would rather give you a butter knife and a piece of wood and say, whittle your own legs than do anything other than the basics. Now, people often ask me how I do the things that I do. Well, I just make my mind up. but a good bit of it was what my sister Barb had said. And then I was thinking about some movie phrases. And one of them that was very impactful for me was from Jurassic Park. Everybody remember Jurassic Park? Remember when they're on the island and it was Jeff Goldblum's character? He was a scientist, and he asked them how do they control breeding in the wild, and the answer was they're genetically engineered. Anybody remember what he said? Oh, no, life finds a way. 13 little letters, 4 small words, life finds a way. I'm alive. I'm still the same in here and in here. Need to find a way. Another one was from Shawshank Redemption. I think everybody knows Morgan Freeman's words in that. You can either get busy living or you can get busy dying. Well, they were in prison, and in a way, I'm now a prisoner in my body. And I can choose whether I'm going to live and prosper or just sit around and feel sorry for myself and wither away. And then when I was putting this together, I thought of something else from a Rambo movie, one of the first Blood movies, where I think it was Murdoch was his commanding officer, and they're in the tent with all the computers, and Murdoch's telling them about how this is the latest in technology and the finest in weaponry. And Rambo says, I always believed the mind is the best weapon. Well, basically, my body went to war with my mind. And I think that happens as you age, too. You still think that you can do a lot of stuff. So as long as you can think it, you can find a way to adapt to the changing situations. Everything's always changing for me. The older I get, the stiffer I get. For me to do what I want to do, I've got to try to come up with additional ways to do that. Okay. Now, there were days where I just said, I need a break, don't bother me, I'm just going to shut down. But quitting overall never entered my mind. And a lot of people, unfortunately, when the situation gets bad, they turn to drugs or alcohol. Never consideration. I've never seen anybody that had a bad situation where drugs and alcohol made it better. It only makes it worse. And things, a lot of times now they're difficult, but things aren't impossible. Okay. Throughout all this, talked to a lot of people, picked up a little couple of things here and there. But one of the things that I also thought is I did these things before. I still want to do them. If I can do them once, I can do it again. And a lot of it is believing in your own abilities. And I believed in my ability, with what I had left to work with, that I could do it. Can I do it at the same level, at the same speed, same precision? No. But I can come close and I can do it, and that's all that really matters. Okay. A lot of times, and we had this conversation, I had this conversation the other day with someone that was an amputee, recently lost part of their foot, and has basically given up life. But what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? A lot of people I think are afraid of failure. But I thought I'm more of a failure if I don't try it than if I just say I can't do it. If I do it and I fail, you got to go back and think about what did I do? What can I do differently the next time that maybe I'll get a little bit further? And I don't know if a cartoon character can be a role model or whatever, but I've always liked Wile E. Coyote, right? Think about it. Wile E. has one goal, catch the Roadrunner, and he never quits. It doesn't matter how many mountains fall on him, how many times he blows himself up into space. he goes back to his Acme catalog, which I've never seen an Acme catalog, but he had one, and he tries something else. And that's how I approached a lot of things. Now, always working, I always wanted to go back to work, and that was probably the hardest decision I had to make. And again, I started networking with people, talking with a lot of people, and when you started taking everything into consideration, at this point not knowing day to day what I'd be able to do, what my endurance level would be, being gainfully employed. Now, Hopkins was willing to create a position for me to have me come back to work, but it was with the understanding that I was last fired, and if there was cutbacks, last hired, I'd be the first fired. I had child support, and then once you do that, I was told it would be hard to go on SSDI. So a lot of people that have been in similar situations to me that I was in recommended just go on SSDI as your health permitted, do volunteer work. Well, that's what I did for quite a few years. And I'm still doing that right now. And that brings us to my 40th birthday. Now, my sister Barb, my goddaughter Cindy, and my boss Bob got together and decided, well, we're going to have a 40th birthday party / celebration of life. So Barb and Cindy start looking for venues, and they go talk to Bob. Bob says they can be big enough. I don't know how many times they went through that. Right. Well, they finally decided on a venue. And it just so happened the only day that was available was on my 40th birthday. Well, they pre-sold tickets, had tickets at the door. It was also a fundraiser. The hall held 600 people, and just about every seat was filled. Then as I started getting better, started doing more, and this is still in '96, thinking about everything that everybody had done for me, with all the work that doctors and the physical therapists and all the hospital staff, all the cards and letters. And this was a time before the internet, where it was all done on a landline or snail mail. And I was getting letters and cards from people that were friends of friends from all over the country. And they were all filled with well wishes. And, thinking about that, naturally I would thank everybody. But to me, just the two words, thank you, just wasn't enough. The best way I could thank people was to live my life and do the best that I can possibly do. And that was a motivating goal for me. Okay. Another thing that concerned me was how my children's peers would react with having a father in my condition. So on the weekends that I would have them, I'd make the 70-mile trip in the morning down to their school, and I volunteered at their school. Got to know their friends. Well, my son was in first grade, and we're at recess one day, and with his classmates, and happened to notice several boys walking our way. They were the older boys, and there was definitely one that was the leader. And he walks up to me, doesn't say a word, reaches out, grabs my hands, and he's going. And I'm thinking, what is this kid going to come up with? So he lets go of him, he steps back, he looks me in the eye, and he says, "Cool hands." And away they went. So that kind of put my fear of my children being harassed because of me, I kind of put that to bed. There were other things that as I started to get better, we were going to do. My one neighbor was into duck pin bowling. Did that a lot as a kid. So I went and talked to Brian, and we'd always come up with little things. So he made this apparatus that went around my hand that held a bowling ball. And I mean, I didn't set the world on fire, but I was in a bowling league for a couple of years. Okay. Another friend of mine, Richard, would come and see me every day in the hospital there. He worked there. And he was an avid hunter and fisherman. And it was one night in January, he'd always go out of state on these trips. And he comes in, and it was about 11 o'clock at night to make sure I didn't need anything. And he says, I want to make you a promise. So what's that? He said, first you got to promise me something. I said, okay, what do I have to promise you? He says, promise me you'll get better, and I promise you we'll go hunting and fishing. This was right after I had the legs of my fingers cut off, right? But he knew that would give me something to think about. So it was several months after we got out of the hospital, came up with starting to use the .22, a rifle. Had a hunting vest, had Velcro sewn on the shoulder pad, had it on the butt of the rifle, and that doesn't have a lot of recoil. So I got practicing with that. So the next thing was, okay, a rifle for deer. I had a .270. Well, that's got quite a recoil. So I talked to my prosthetist again, and he said, sure, bring it in. Well, back then you really didn't think about a whole lot of things. His office was in Baltimore City, not too far from Memorial Stadium. Parking lot was about a half a block away. I get out of the car, sling this rifle over my shoulder, and walking down Baltimore City with a rifle. Well, he came up with a device that clipped on the stock. My hand went in there, and the following year, this was like 2 years afterwards though, we went out and we did go deer hunting. And then back with my sister said about with my fingers and stuff, they'd be my tools. Everything I did, my hobbies, my interests, all required my hands. This is 29 years later, I still haven't found any tools that were made to be used by people without fingers. So I have to figure out how to use the conventional tools. Okay, now I couldn't control what happened to me, but I could control how I reacted to it. And I am an amputee. That's a label. But I don't let that define who I am. You know, an amputee is a what. It doesn't make a definition of somebody. And you know, something else that I kind of run like parallels to different things. And a lot of things I think in life are a puzzle. And people like doing various types of puzzles. Well, think about it. You own your home. You go to the big box store. You go to the internet. You take this piece. If it fits, okay. If it doesn't, you find another piece. Well, I think life's the same way. It's finding pieces that fit in your life. And you're making your own picture when you're done. And it's unique just to you. And I mean, you can see some of the stuff that I've done. You've seen some of the slideshows. And let's see. And a lot of it's a learning experience. I mean, I've failed many, many times, but you step back and look at it like Wile E. Coyote. Try it a different way. And you know, you usually come through, and I usually come through and achieve close to what I want. And all these projects that I do, it starts with an idea. Just like when I became an amputee, there was no manual you can go to, no internet. It's like learn as you go. And I don't know how many times, you know, things have changed, designs have changed. Like on this big wheel trike. I look at it now and I see things that now if I would do it, different changes I would make with it. But I think everybody kind of likes the big wheel trike. You know, I had a story with that. I had it on a trailer one day, and I was going to probably a tractor show or car show with it. And it was a 2-lane road, and I'm going down the road this way, about 60 miles an hour, and a bunch of bikers, guys on haulers are going the other way. And I look in the mirror, and here they come up on me. When they flagged me over, they wanted to take pictures of my bike. Right. So, okay, now from there, we got a few other little pictures. Go to those. Okay. Okay, there's some of the pictures when my kids. Okay, this one here. We'll go back where we go. Okay, the guy on the far right, my friend Richard. Well, he'd always go on these here deep sea fishing trips. And this was about 3 years after all this. And I said to him one day, I want to go tuna fishing. And he says, Chuck, he says, you've done a lot of things. He said, there's no way you're going to go tuna fishing. He says, how are you going to hold on to the rod? I said, well, you know, you make him harnesses. It goes over your shoulder, around your waist. The rod sits in a pocket. It's clipped to you. He said, yeah, but if you hook a fish, it's going to pull you in the water. I said, got that covered. I said, see this heavy rope? We're tying it around me, and you and a couple other of my friends that are big guys, you get to hold on to that rope. Well, we went 45 miles out into the ocean that day. Within the first, I guess, hour, we had 6 tuna on board. And that was one of those once and done trips. You know, everything was perfect that day. I mean, you're sitting on a boat and it's not much rougher than sitting in the chairs now. Nice, cool day. And we were one of the few boats that caught something that weekend. And our captain knew where to go. Richard had went out the day before, and they were one of the few boats. And when we're leaving the marina, everybody had already left the marina, and we're just taking our good old time. The captain says, about 35 miles out, you're going to see, looks like a marina of floating boats. He said, we're going past there. Well, he knew where to go. And of course, you know, you start the radio chatter, and of course you start saying, we got, you know, 6 on board, and everybody wants to know where we're at. Well, he's not telling. So that was a great, great time. Next one. This is a little wedding scene on my train layout. Now, quite a few years ago, I happened to come in one evening and turn the news on and caught the tail end of the news. And they were interviewing this young lady, Olivia Faraball. And she was on season 10 of The Voice. And she made it through to the last 100 contestants. She didn't make it to the final rounds. And she was talking about how she does a lot of her own songs. And she had this project where she was asking for people with inspirational stories to email her the story. The deadline was the next day. And she said they were going to review it and they'd get back to you in a few weeks. There's a video of my train layout. I forwarded that with a little write-up. A day or so later, she called me. She said, can I come and interview you? Well, I call my train layout A Simpler Time. I tried to set it up so that it's in the 1950s. She wrote and recorded a song she called A Simpler Time, where it's about falling in love in the 50s because of that wedding scene. She's now in Nashville. And of course, Wile E. Coyote. I had this done. This is on one of my station wagons. Down the bottom, there's the Road of Life. And it's kind of a glare on it. But on the left-hand side, there's a little sign with an arrow that says set a goal. Next one is never quit. And then, of course, at the end, he's seasoning the Roadrunner to taste. Okay. Now, that's about it for the presentation. Of course, probably just about everybody here knows from the Senior Center. So this will go out to some of the people that are watching live streamed. A lot of times now, I've got a reputation where I go out to different places and people come up to me and say, what are you building now? Right? It's like, well, I'm spending most of my time keeping what I've already built running. But I'm doing a lot of work, and I'm with the local senior center, South Central York County Senior Center. That's a mouthful. And there's several things that are coming up. This coming Sunday, April 27th, we do 2 bingos a year. We need to sell lots of tickets between now and then. Tickets are $25 in advance. They're $30 at the door. We'll be selling them at the Senior Center on Thursday and Friday, and they'll be at the door on Sunday. The next thing is Give Local York. And I think most of the people here know what Give Local York is. It's a 24-hour period where it's a fundraiser for nonprofit organizations. And there's over 300 nonprofits in York County that are participating in this. And, you know, when we were in school, a teacher would come out and say, here's a box of candy, it's a fundraiser, go out and sell it. The one that sells the most gets a prize. Well, that was in the 60s. This is 60 years later, and now the director of the Senior Center says, hey, we got a fundraiser. Go out and raise some funds, and we'll want a prize. Well, that's May 1st and 2nd. Now, this QR code, you know how Steve Martin felt when the telephone books came out and he was somebody? Remember that movie, The Jerk? Okay. Well, I got to playing around with it, and if you scan that QR code, it brings up the website, but it lists me as a fundraiser. So I get credit for anybody that clicks on that and makes a donation. So, you know, back in the 60s, it was let your fingers do the walking through the yellow pages. Well, this is let your fingers do the clicking on a keyboard. And the last thing, and this is something big for me, this is the third year I've been doing this, and I have a great crew that works with us. We do our third annual car show, and it benefits 2 essential organizations. The funds and proceeds from the car show benefit the Senior Center, and Rose Fire Company provides the foods, and whatever they make from the food sales benefits the fire company. It's Friday, September 19th. It's from 3 to 8. So anybody that would like to stop out, please do. In the years past, I've had my big wheel trike there. It's going to be there again this year. And anybody that's brave enough or dares to climb up on it and have your picture taken, you're more than welcome to do it. Okay. So with that, I guess if anybody has any questions, comments.
What was your favorite piece you did that you built?
Can you say that into the?
Oh, yeah. Chuck, what was the favorite piece that you've built from scratch? Do you have a favorite?
Well, actually, those 3 over there. There's a lot of other things that I have built, but the first thing I did was the Johnny Cash, which was a whole bunch of other parts. And I wanted to see if I could get a little garden tractor to run on a 1.5 horsepower throttle body or throttle engine. And I did that. And then I built the big wheel trike. And I had a lot of fun doing that. That seems to be a crowd favorite wherever we go. The next thing was the mini tea bucket. That started as an old wheelbarrow. And just about everything other than like the transaxles in those or the engines, most of the other pieces I had to fabricate. They're all custom made. There was no manual, it was just an idea. And then in this electronic age with EVs, and of course the older I get, the more I have to rely on a little bit of help getting around. I had acquired a few electric wheelchairs. So I built the first, as far as I know, it's the first bagged electric wheelchair. And for those that don't know what a bagged vehicle is, it's a vehicle that rides on an airbag suspension, and when they park it, they can deflate it, and the chassis sits on the ground. Well, I've got an electric wheelchair, but instead of the airbags, I use electric cylinders to do that.
And one more question, because I don't know the answer either. right after your amputations, what was your first project that you worked on?
Huh? Probably my deck. I had a swimming pool, and it was a ladder and a needed deck, so that was probably the first major project. Of course, I'd help doing that. And of course, now I need a little bit more help doing things.
And tell us how you learned how to drive.
I got in the car and took off.
No, I mean with your amputations, do you have special equipment?
Well, I have hand controls. That was a whole nother ordeal. I did what the doctors told me to do and notified MVA in Maryland. Well, they cannot say you're disabled, you can't drive. But once you turn your license in, they make it almost near impossible to get them back. And they would put these unrealistic demands on demanding information from your doctor within a 4-week period, and then sit on it for months before they give you an answer. And once I got my license back, well, actually, there was a story with that too. When I went up to do the driving test, I had that big old van, and it was in the wintertime, had some snow, and the area for the three-point turn, they had plowed so it was even smaller. So when we get in the van with the examiner, he said, are you sure you want to use this? I said, it's the only thing I got. So of course, you play the whole 9 yards, you know, you check the mirrors, set your seatbelt, start the vehicle up, and he's still struggling to put his seatbelt on. I reached over and said, here, let me help you. So did that, and then you go back in, and they don't really have a sense of humor there. Because the girl says, how tall are you and what's your weight? And I said, with or without my legs on. That didn't go over very big. So, anyway, you know, I had fun with it back then. We still have fun with me being an amputee now. So,
Can you share with us how many pairs of legs you've had?
it's like about every 4 years I'd get a pair, mainly because I was so active I'd wear them out and break them. Now I've slowed down. This is less than a year old, and the quality overall has went down dramatically. I've had to have these back in for repairs several times.
They don't build them like they used to.
No, they don't. And the price goes up. Even after insurance, the insurance didn't cover $6,400 towards these legs. Anybody else? Frank.
I watched your reconstruction of your nose. For the John Hopkins surgeon, was this experimental surgery, or had they done something like this before?
There was a lot of discussion on where the skin was going to come from. And the surgeon was actually I think he was a professor of plastic surgery. And a lot of the different doctors, when they would have visiting doctors in town for seminars or whatever, they'd asked if they could bring doctors in to consult with them. So they had doctors from around the world that consulted on how they were going to redo my face. And of course, back then, everything was paper records, and your medical records had to go with you. So by the time I got out of Hopkins, they had to have a special cart just to carry the volumes of books around.
So Chuck, we've seen a lot of things on the screen. Did you do all those within the last 29 years that we've seen tonight?
Yes. Now the tractors, it was a good friend of mine who's no longer with us. He was very skilled at doing all that. So I'd work with him in redoing those. And then I mean, I did what I could with them, but a lot of the mechanical work and stuff, he had the expertise and the knowledge and skill to paint them. But it's taking them apart, cleaning them up, doing things, I'll help with them with that. But most of the other stuff, well, like the big wheel trike, the T-bucket, the electric wheelchair, which the only metal on that is the old Farmall tractor grill. The rest of that body is all wood that I made all out of wood. And a lot of those parts had to be fabricated. And as far as welding, I just tack weld pieces. I have some friends that do the welding for me.
How many hours of sleep do you get at night?
I mean, doing this, I can't tell you how many times during the middle of the night a thought came up and I had to get up and jot it down. You know, that was pretty difficult trying to condense, 68 years into a short presentation. So, anybody else? Bob.
I guess I gotta wait for the lady with the microphone. I just wanted to say that, for those people who don't know you, I do, and I've been to your house, and people don't realize all that train layout that you saw and buildings and whatnot, he fabricated and built most of all that stuff from scratch and built that layout.
Well,
How many
some of
years
the
it
houses,
took
some
you?
of the houses were kits.
Some of them were kits, but a lot
Yeah.
of them, like you told me, that you built yourself.
That and
you
the
know.
dollhouse was not a kit. That was all scratch built,
Right.
and it was a lot of it was started in 2000, and it was winter projects.
Right. But yeah, it's quite an amazing layout to see in
Thank
person.
you.
So, I don't even know what to say,
Yeah.
but just even watching you tonight, even like flipping those papers, like how do you do that without hands, without fingers?
I don't think about it
And
anymore.
you just effortlessly do
Yeah.
it. I remember, going to the hospital, and silly me, I took a game of Scrabble because like you were going to play a game, and I walked in the room and I was like, oh crap, how's he going to play Scrabble? We put it on the table. He took his thumbs and we played. It was amazing. And then, I mean, there's just so many things. And like I said, we had some fun with it. Like, and I had some things I didn't know what to say. You don't know what to say, But one day I went to Chuck and I said, I got a phrase for you. You know what I'm going to say?
Mm-hmm.
I said, you may be defeated, but you're not defeated.
Well, we actually had T-shirts. Years ago, it was a group called Amputees Across America, where it was some people that rode bikes. They organized this event that once a year they'd do a different route across America, and it was usually 4 to 5 riders, and they'd only ride as much as the weakest rider could ride that day. And for a few years, they came in up in York, and we participated in that. And Hanger Prosthetic, went to them with that phrase, and they made us T-shirts up for that.
That was another thing I remember looking into the Amputee Association. And again, do I go and I tell him, like, who wants to be a member of the Amputee Association, right? So at first he said no. Short time later, he's the president of the association. So there's just so much I could add to, but just want to say I love
Thank
you,
you.
and I'm really proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I get a picture of you guys?
Thank you.
Like with the senior center, had some friends that invited me quite a few times to go with them. And my first thought was, senior center? Heck, that's for old people, right? Well, let's see. Again, I got to get involved. So Nicole's not here, but I mentioned Nicole about the Christmas parade that Guild started. And she says, well, here's a hat. You're the chairperson for that committee. Then I said something about a car show. He says, well, here's another hat. And the last one she gave me was the official, unofficial handyman for the senior center without hands. So, you know, I really don't get offended, you know. So, now this Halloween, I don't know what I'm going to wear for a costume. Somehow that's always, my amputations are always worked into the costume. So, anything else? Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight, and thank you, Chuck, especially.
You're
because
welcome.
That presentation was, it just came together so incredibly well, and I know how much work it was. So
Yes.
all really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, Gina was very instrumental, and I mean, she did the technical end of this. I had the ideas, you know. Technology and I don't get along, you know. Like, I still got an 8-track player that works on my Camaro and VHS player in my house. Oh. Do what?
I still have a landline.
Yeah. So, okay.
Good job, Chuck.
Thank you.